Okay, so the first thing that we do, because some of this goes on social, is that we just smile. Okay, great. It's such a funny way to start.
They're good. Good. It gets the
You know
barrier.
what? Right. Here we go. It's just like it's like a little awkward first date moment, and then we get to talking. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm excited. I have someone who is going to be my friend. We're not friends yet, but I think it's going to be
I don't
a
think
quick.
it'll.
Me neither. I have a great feeling about it. This is Harry Cunane, and he is the author and an active member of the addiction recovery community since his recovery began more than 7 years ago, participating in a 12-step program and volunteering at rehabs and jails all around Philadelphia to spread a message of hope. He now works as a resource director for the same treatment center where he originally sought help for his own addiction. He lives in Audubon, New Jersey with his wife, Juliet, his daughter, Aubrey, and his son, Sawyer. Harry and his mother, Madeline, are the authors of the children's book, You Are Always Loved, and the book that we are going to get down and dirty into today, called Under Our Roof, A Son's Battle for Recovery, a Mother's Battle for Her Son, which I just finished. And woo. So hi, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so
So
super excited to talk to you.
yeah, me too. Can't wait. We're gonna get right into it. Want to give us like the okay, want to give us like the down and dirty on the story? Like what happened?
What happened? So it's tough. Even after writing a book, it's hard to really break it down. But I'll try to go quick,
Yeah.
give you a sense of sort
Wait,
of what
isn't it writing your story in a book? Let's before you say this, writing a story in your book is exhausting, isn't it?
it is exhausting. We were working on it for more than 2 years.
Oh wow.
Fortunately, we each only had to write half of a book, so that makes it.
Oh, but Harry, what you had to write in half of a book. I need to explain this to everybody. Harry writes the first half of the book is all about his substance addiction, which I want him to tell us all about for a lot of reasons. This podcast talks about, the real underlying stuff in eating disorders, body obsession, addictions, all of it. So, we're in good company, you and me. Um, but I'm fascinated because it's like you're writing a little and then your mom's writing a little. And I imagine you guys are like reading each other's work, right?
So we didn't until we wrote the whole first half. So
Oh,
we came
so it was like a reveal?
Yes. So we came up with an outline of key events, and we did that because we didn't want to alter each other's memory of what we went through and what we experienced. So
Oh,
that's why, especially in the beginning, it can feel so far apart. We're living in the same house, but her perception and my perception of what we're going through is so different.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
we
it's I
did.
mean, it's fascinating, true. Like I'm such a believer in, like a believer in denial. Like I don't know who isn't a believer in denial, but it's pretty amazing how we can really convince ourselves both in addiction and in watching addiction that it isn't really happening or it isn't that bad. I love that part with your mom. It's like she kind of knows everything's really bad, but she also like has this protective denial where she's like, but like maybe not, maybe yes. So why don't you give us the key points of what happened and how you got into this beautiful space of recovery?
Perfect. So to go, the quick version is it started in a way that seemed totally normal. Drinking in high school early on was something that kind of immediately for me, although as a young kid, I never thought I'd even drink. I had all these things that I wasn't going to do, and drinking was one of them. But for me, almost immediately, the feeling that I got was just a feeling of calm, of peace, it took away my anxiety, my worry, that these anxieties that maybe I didn't even realize were so consuming to me just because it was my normal until I felt the relief
Hmm.
through alcohol. And quickly I started to progress. So I started, smoking pot, which again seemed relatively normal in high school. There was a lot of kids that were doing it. It started out as a social experience. We were doing it together as a group, and to feel a part of. Um, and not long after that, it then progressed again to cocaine. And that's for me when it really started to shift, because that was no longer, at 15, 16 years old,
Right.
doing cocaine in the bathroom in high school is no longer as socially acceptable
Right.
as
Right. Right.
drinking, in a field on the weekend. Like that's
Right.
normal.
Like funneling beer, like
Yeah,
funneling beers with your
like,
friends is a little different than snorting cocaine in the
yeah,
bathroom. I can
cocaine
see
on
that
a
distinction.
calculator
Yes.
is like not
Yes.
not okay.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But it was something that at the time it felt easier to hide because it didn't have the smell of uh,
Yeah.
pot. It didn't, I wasn't slurring my words like I was drinking, but it gave me that same level of relief that I felt when I started drinking. So it became something that I could use more often, more freely, and hide it better, or at least I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to fast forward, that's the way that the progression started. And I found myself in a position of, then moving on to painkillers, to opiates.
How did that happen? Like, do you know when you decided to like level up like that?
So for me, it was really just an opportunity. I was one day there was Percocets there, and I didn't have cocaine, and I wanted something. So I was like, well, can't can't be worse than being sober. So I'll try it, and that's it was really something.
Right. Yeah. Makes
Once you're
sense. Makes sense at the time.
at the time, it makes
Right.
perfect
Yeah.
sense,
It's a
but
crazy what makes sense at the time, isn't it?
it is.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just like again immediately was just consumed.
Yeah.
That became I was would didn't even care about cocaine anymore. It was like this is the feeling I want it, and I want it all the time. And that's when things really started to deteriorate in my
Yeah.
life. So I was in college, I was failing in college, I was constantly getting myself in situations where I was getting robbed or held up at gunpoint, or something horrible was going on. I was getting beat up in a fight.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting. I mean, it's a podcast, so we're listening, but you're just like a clean cut, you know, white kid who's
Yeah.
in these really precarious situations scoring drugs. I mean, did it ever occur to you when you were doing that, like in those dangerous neighborhoods, getting beat up, all that, what's happening, right? Like, this is bad.
So in the beginning, there was almost a thrill to it because it was so different from the way and where I was raised. I was
Hmm.
raised in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but it was only a 15-minute drive, 20-minute drive to North Philly, where felt like a whole different world,
Hmm.
and a world where there were all these other exciting things going on. So that's how it started. But by the end, it just felt like almost like it was normal because the friends that I had surrounded myself with were
Yeah.
other people who were using and caught up in these same situations. I
Yeah.
couldn't tell my family what was going on because they wouldn't get it. But in my circle, this was the norm.
Normative. Yeah. It's the stories are, I want to say great, but I don't mean that. They're enveloping, and it's amazing sort of the lines that we cross without knowing it, right? That sort of unacceptable becomes acceptable. That book reads that concept really well. When you look back on it, what are the things that you think, oh my God, I can't even believe I went to those lengths?
For me, I mean, there's so much. What was most
If you had to make a top
painful,
three list,
I would say the top three and the top all of them when it comes down to more so were the emotional side of my daughter was born. So I'm 20 years old, completely caught up in addiction, and find out I'm going to be a dad.
Mm. What was
And
that like?
for a moment, it was really hopeful because I thought that that was going to yank me out of this life, and I was going to all of a sudden be this dad that I envisioned.
Right.
I had a great father to look up to. I wanted to be like him. I knew that snorting pills and being a father didn't mix in the way
Right.
that I wanted. So I had this moment of hope, which was quickly crushed because I realized right away that I could not stop using. So that, those three worst things, I mean, were the things that I did and told myself that, I needed to do, convincing myself that if I don't get high, if I'm sick and withdrawing, I'm not going to be able to read a bedtime story, take care of my
Right.
kids, and the lengths that you go. I mean, so much of it revolved around that. I was stealing because I was using drugs and because I needed to buy more drugs.
Right.
But at the same time, I would almost tell myself, well, I'm stealing so I can get diapers and formula, but my parents
Yeah.
was gone. So it's like all of those things that I did surrounding that relationship were just emotionally the most painful
It's
by far.
so amazing. Addiction is so separate in a way, every substance, whatever, but it's so common, right? Like I just heard like I call them like rational lies, right? Like we rationalize. And I've heard that, in our communities. It's not like I certainly did not make that up, but it's amazing what your brain will allow for you to believe. And in that way, I want to say, like, doesn't addiction have to be a disease? I mean, I believe it's a disease. You believe it's a disease, but doesn't it have to be a disease when it can override like a parental love, which is the greatest love on? I mean, that to me in this book, that is to me was one of the big keys. It's like, wow, like look at him now and look what addiction does to people with our decision making.
Yeah. And I think it's so true because we know it, but I think all too often people kind of see someone at that lowest point and are
Yeah.
too quick to kind of write them off as they're look at them now. But then on the other end of that, and that's why we wanted to write a full half of the book about the recovery process. Is if you walked past me on the street 8 years ago, 9 years ago, you'd be really quick to say, go to the other side of the street and write me off. But if you walk by me today, you'd have no idea I'm in recovery. And
Yeah.
I think there's so many people in recovery that all around us that we just don't even realize
Oh yeah. Well,
everywhere.
kind of like them more because they've seen
Yeah.
some shit. I mean, those are my favorite kind of people. Like people who have risen above are my kind of people. So I'm real excited to talk to you today. Just like to have the conversations, to like throw it out on the floor, have the real thing. Because frankly, I mean, I have so many questions for you, but as I'm reading the book, like the podcast is called What You're Craving, right? Which is really about, you know, we could talk about opiates and we could talk about the epidemic and we could talk about the numbers and we could talk about what it does to the body and we can talk about eating disorders in that way. But I love to get to the bottom of things because I think that's where the hearts connect, and I think that's where the souls connect. And I wonder if you have any idea at this point um, what you were really craving. Do you know? Or what the genesis of the whole thing was? Like, do you think it was just biological? Do you think it was emotional? Like, what part of the spiritual? What do you really think now?
I mean, I think it's every area, I think, and what I was craving over time shifted,
Mhm.
because what I was craving the first time I drank was, fun, a little euphoria. What I was craving by the end of the road was to just numb out
Right.
how horrible I felt about myself and the things that I was doing and the person that I had become. I hated every part of it. Um, and I just wanted to numb that out and quiet it out and really shut down.
Yeah.
But I think in the beginning it was, there's a lot of talk about a void, spiritual void or whatever kind of void that people feel. I think, in hindsight, I had that. I don't think I ever would have been able to recognize that as a 12, 13-year-old who was going to drink for the first time.
Do you think there's any part that because like so in my story, right? Like, my dad died really traumatically when I was 3. I like never fit. Like we very different stories, but really similar stories, which is what I love about addiction, about life, about everything. Like, right, we're really more the same than we are different. So I'm pretty like clear on it, right? I mean, and I've sat in a lot of chairs and with a lot of shamans and whatever. But like, in a way, do you think that that normalcy of your upbringing and all, do you think that that was like harder to figure out why you were doing it or fueled it in a different way?
I think it's a very interesting question, and nobody's asked
Well,
that.
thank
I
you.
like
I'm
that.
just here to spice it up.
That's good. I don't know. I mean, I wanted to sort of highlight also because I think, um, sometimes there is the assumption that, there's got to be some trauma, there's got to be something else, and very often there is. Um, I think for me, it just maybe it was, the expectations that I thought I had for myself, or whatever the case may be. I just realized at a certain point that I didn't think I was capable of living up to it.
Mm,
And, it was easier for me to not try and to just completely collapse than to try to meet some bar that I was going to continue to fall just short of.
gosh, I think that is so helpful, you know? And then there's that biological component, right? Because there's this great, I don't know if you've ever heard this, I think it's a Chinese or Japanese proverb, and it says, man has drink, drink has drink, drink has man, right? And it's like we have, sometimes big trauma, sometimes little, sometimes whatever, this sensitivity, this vulnerability, and then we're in, right? Because that's right. And then it's like drink has man. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. Once you start, it's out of my
Yeah. And you
control.
shapeshift into these new communities. And so there's this thing I really want to talk to you about. Well, there's a lot of things I really want to talk to you about, but there's this thing I really want to talk to you about because I think it's such a commonality in addictions and it's something we're like not talking enough about. Because I remember in the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like there were these moments where you're like, I should ask for help. I should ask for help. And then you're like, it's not bad enough, or like, oh, it's not the right time. I don't want to bother my mom. And I think this is so universal and not talked to, and it seemed to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, and I want to hear everything you think about this, but it seemed to me like it came from a place of shame and not enoughness. Tell me more.
It very much came from a place of shame.
What was it like? Like, tell me about a few moments where you're like, this is effing bad. I got to get out of this. And then you're like, just kidding. It's okay.
And that's, it's funny now, but like that's how it is.
Oh,
There
totally.
were so many moments where, um, like something I tried to write about in the book is I knew what I was doing was wrong. So one example I'll give, and I think this was in the book, but when I was really caught up before my daughter was born, I was using opiates nonstop. I was
What does
not
nonstop mean for the listener?
so hundreds of milligrams a day and just whatever I could afford. So $100 a day, $300 a day, whatever I got my hands on, I snorted.
Wow. Can I just also recommend to anybody listening that they just like look at your picture now. I wish you gave like a before picture. I wish we get a picture. Like you should put them side by side. I'd love to see it. But it's what recovery, what we're capable of in recovery is just like, you're just so like bright eyed and white shirted. And, this is hard to believe sometimes.
It is. But no, so going back to that, so I would use and I would spend every dollar that I had
Yeah.
on using, and I would, to the point where every morning I woke up and I threw up bile because my stomach was on fire, it felt like. And the only time that I would eat was when my migraines were so bad that even all of the opiates couldn't take away the headache. So I
Wow.
would eat some sugar and I would go and I would buy, in Philly, there's tasty cakes, which I
Yeah.
thought were everywhere, but they're more
Well, I'm
regional.
like a food addict, so you have me at Tasty Cakes.
So
I'm very interested in the story.
it's a little like sell them at the gas station.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
little,
no, I know. Very much so.
and,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would eat that. It was like 85 cents. So it was the cheapest thing I could buy with a lot of calories. And I
Yeah.
remember doing that and just being like, this is not okay.
You
I'm
knew
like,
it. You knew it somewhere. Like I shouldn't be having tasty cake for lunch for 85
but
cents.
I wasn't willing. I would spend over $100 every day for pills
Hmm.
I wasn't willing to spend $5 for a meal.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of those things where it's like when I'm checking out buying that tasty cake, it's like I knew I needed to ask for help. I knew something was wrong, but the shame was so because I didn't want anyone to know that that's how I was living, that that's where I was in life, that, given all the opportunity that I was afforded, I'm now at a gas station in North Philly scrounging for any little.
Scrounging pennies together for your tasty cake. Did it occur to you that you mattered to people?
It did. And
It did. So in the way, so you knew like, oh my, this is impacting my parents. You knew this, you knew your addiction was impacting people's lives. Is that safe to say?
it is. And I think the sad part was that what seemed easier at the time was rather than to go to them and ask for help, it was to just continue to try to just disappear, and kind of fall away. I remember being caught up and kind of looking at other people who were homeless and struggling and, didn't have um, the support that I had. And I was envious of that.
You wish that people would stop supporting you.
Yeah, because then there would be no expectations and I couldn't hurt them anymore. That's where I was,
Yeah.
because
So yeah, I
if
get that.
cared, then I wouldn't maybe feel as bad about what I'm doing because I feel the shame and I know I'm putting it on them.
God, shame comes in all different shapes and sizes, doesn't it? Because I can remember so well, like what mine sort of turned into was like, I don't think I can ever get well. And some version of like, and I just don't think I matter in this world. I came with a lot of like suicidality. So I was just like, I just die, and it never occurred to me until I got sober and until I got off sugar and flour, like it shifted this idea that like opposite day, like you are so important, you matter to, it never occurred to me like that, for lack of a better word, sort of like that selfishness of what was going on. And so asking for help, I think also, and I don't know what you think, like, I also like, I think this is important for the listeners. I think this is really where people struggle. I have so many questions about this. It's like what you're saying, like, I just didn't think I could get well. And I didn't really have it in me for like another failure in life. I just didn't have it in me.
Yeah. I mean, I had failed at everything I tried.
Yeah.
I tried on my own a lot of different ways to try to stop. None of it worked. So it's like thinking that I would go and ask for help and let them down again. And now not only have I let them down, but I've also let them in to
Oh,
see. So it's like
wait, can I tell you my favorite line of your book? We are going out of order, which is the best conversations, in my opinion. This is my favorite. I have like on the screen, it says fave quote in all yellow. It's like cracked my heart open. You said, because I love so much that this book has so much to do with recovery, because I just think people think like you give up the thing and then it's like unicorns, rainbows, and parties. And this book is like, not just kidding. Like found drugs in my desk, was like, oops, like, and anyway, I'll talk about it in a second, but this is the best quote of the book, my opinion. During active addiction, I had built walls around myself, protecting me from exposure, pain, and abandonment. Yet these same walls were now working against me. I mean,
it's yeah. I mean, I love that you caught that about the book of none of the problems just go away when you stop.
yeah.
When I stopped using drugs, once the detox was over, okay, I wasn't sick and withdrawing anymore, but all of the habits that I had created to protect myself were, I mean, you don't just stop lying now that you're off drugs. It's like I had built a habit of lying about everything I did and everywhere I went and who I was. And I had shut everybody out. So it's
Oh
like you
yeah.
build.
I love that line. It says, if you want to know why you're drinking too much, stop drinking too much. You'll figure out real quick, like Insert your addiction into that sentence. But listen, and we're both here to say best decisions we ever made, new life, great, great, great. It's just, we got to work for things sometimes. My favorite Buddhist psychologist, Tara Brach, has the same analogy where she says, we build this armor on ourselves to protect ourselves, but then we're in this armor banging on it, screaming, and like no one can hear us. And that's what I heard from that. And you're like, here I am, no skills, no nothing, just full of pain. So tell us about this, bottom. What was the precipice for you deciding to change your life?
So it was, and this is where it's been funny talking it through with my mom and doing the book. She
I
thought the
can't
bottom
even.
was, in her eyes, the bottom was because the sort of external thing was that I stole money from my parents.
Right.
So she's like, "Oh, you got caught
How
stealing."
much money did you steal?
It was like $4,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty legit.
Yeah, and just like kept just night after night, I was taking her ATM card and basically until there was nothing in there.
Wow.
Tried to pay the bills and couldn't. So, but for me, the bottom, so to speak, was the emotional, the feeling of that hope that I had the day that my daughter was born,
Mm-hmm.
and for the entire next year, wanting nothing else other than to stop using drugs and just completely being incapable.
Yeah.
And realizing over that year that this is it. This is my life. I'm never going to change. I'm going to die this way. And having feelings of, is she better off without me? This girl that I thought I loved so much and wanted to be there for is like, am I doing more harm than good just by being here?
Wow.
Feeling like that about your own child and just kind of where you are in life and everything falling apart, and all of those moments that you talked about earlier of being so close to asking for help every night, going to bed like I'm going to do something different, and just waking up in the morning and not.
Would you
you know
say in the morning, like I can hand, like, to me, it's like the two most dangerous things I can say is like, it's all good and I've got it. Like it's never all good and I never got it. Like those are like the two most dangerous things that come out of my mouth. Like, what would you say in the morning?
In the morning, it was, I can't even get out of bed because I'm
Right. Like I need to
withdrawing.
get my
So it was like,
drugs.
if I'm not, it just immediately those rational lies of, if I'm this sick from withdrawal, I can't go to work, can't take care of my daughter, I can't do anything. So it's all going to fall apart anyway. So I have to use just so I can go to work, change a diaper,
Right.
be present, because I couldn't be emotionally available, but I could be physically there if I was high.
So you ended up going to treatment. What was that like?
For me, it was fantastic. I was able to get really good treatment.
But what made you go? Did they make you go?
They didn't make it.
Parents?
So what they did, so back to that bottom, the one day put all the bank statements out on the table and just laid it out there. There was all these papers, little items highlighted all over. I didn't even need to look at it. I knew.
Right. Gig was up.
No,
Right.
it's a bank statement. My bank statement's got a big zero. This has got a
Right.
lot.
Like you weren't like, what is this? This is so interesting. You were like, all right, hands up in the air.
Yeah, and just in that one moment, I had been confronted so many times, but in that moment, I don't want to say I made the decision and I, wanted to do this. I wanted to get help because I don't know if I was there when
Right.
that happened. But I know at that time, it almost seemed like the easier way out was like, okay, I'm going to go to treatment. They offered me help. They
Right.
were incredibly supportive when they confronted me, and they offered me help. And I was like, yes, it's drugs. I'm going to go.
You know what I think sometimes I wonder what you think about this. And I think this is so important for anybody listening who's struggling. Like grace is this really fascinating concept. And I've had people sitting in my office, on a consultation, like, a trial. And I'll say, here's what I think you should do. And they'll say, let me think about it. And I'll say, you have every right to think about it, but in my experience, grace is about 24 hours. So if you're even considering that you might be willing to change your life right now, like you might be able to get grace again, but you definitely have it right now. So like
Yeah.
roll. So it's like sometimes it's like never clear, like those moments we get well or we decide to get well, which is why the other thing I believe wholeheartedly is like you just never, ever, ever stop trying, because you just never know which is going to be the time you get well.
Absolutely. And you never know when that opportunity is going to come again.
That's
That's where I think there were so many times that, maybe if I was confronted at the right moment, maybe before I would have said yes. I don't know. But if I didn't say yes that day, it's not like it would have been easy to say, hey, tomorrow, it would have been the next crisis if I survived to make it there. For families that friends that I have today that are struggling, it's the same thing. Just keep
can't
trying.
quit quitting. I mean, that's the deal, right? And I don't know, you and I have sat in these circles for lots of times. I mean, I've seen people where they're like, your story is like this too, but you're listening. You're like, I know the story ends well, but this is very long. And I mean, I've seen people like, yeah, like the 25th time,
Yeah.
and especially with food, by the way. I mean, because it's a substance you use, right?
Yeah.
Especially with eating disorders. It's like
Yeah, you can't.
sometimes sometimes the
Completely.
recovery happens. Like for me, it was like, oh, wow, I haven't done this for 63 days. This is crazy. Okay, maybe I'll try a little harder. Cause I think that idea of that chronic failure really does something to the soul.
For
Big
sure.
time, big time, big time. I love how much you write about recovery. You know, I think books really stop at like, and then I got sober. And then the ponies came. I ran into the sunset.
That's when we were approached to do the book, that was one of the things I said from the start. Because I
Yeah.
was like, every book out there that I'm aware of is like 300 pages of a war story, this horrible tale, and now the person's in long-term recovery. And same
Yeah.
thing with movies that are out there. And it's just like, it's not that simple, and I don't think there's that much, sort of reality or hope when you look at, you got to see both sides, because I don't think you can appreciate and understand what recovery is or looks like without seeing the ugly truth of addiction. But it's like you said, it's not like I just put it down and all of a sudden here I am. There's a
Well,
lot of work, and
yeah. And because here's the story is so good because I talk about this all the time with clients and people, but truth be told, in my opinion, but I mean, again, and I've been an addiction therapist for so long. So I was listening to some of your podcasts and everyone's like, that story is so terrible. And I'm like, I mean, it's really bad, but but to me, the most heart wrenching part of the story actually is when you get out of rehab. And to me, this moment, I mean, I had a visceral reaction where you're like in your house and like you and the girlfriend decide that you're like not, and you're like not going to be together and you're in the nursery and it's like empty. Sorry if I'm like re-traumatizing you, but
okay.
sometimes I wish they weren't podcasts and they could like see your face. You're like, Molly, I understand I was there. Like, stop telling the story. But because there's such a good line, and and like, cause that's it, right? You're sober. You were like, they took the armor off. You're like sober. Everyone's like, yeah, you have like 60 days. You're like in this nursery, you're like out your kid and you sit and you remember this thing that they said to you in rehab, which is that it's gained in drops and lost in buckets. Cause then the rebuild has to happen. This is what everybody forgets. No
Yeah.
wonder people don't get well. You should get well. Harry and I believe this wholeheartedly, but yeah. So like, then like, how did you get it together to push through that? That's when the work begins.
That's really when the work begins. And that's, I was lucky to have a foundation of, I did a month in treatment and then I did 90 days in a structured sober living. So I wasn't going home super, super early, super raw. But I was also sort of in this bubble, and it was like, okay, now I'm back.
Right.
I came back, I think I came out of treatment on a Tuesday. Knew I was going back to work on Monday, back at the same job where everybody knew I had been MIA for 4 months, and where was I? And
Shame, shame, shame,
yeah,
shame, shame.
my daughter's mother, trust is destroyed. I'm living at my parents' house. There's no trust. I'm driving to meetings and they're like following me to see
Wow.
where I'm going.
In this moment, you can't believe that you're going to be able to repair your life.
No, I for a long time, I had relatively small outlook on like what a new life could look like.
Yeah.
I remember when I got the treatment, I started out and I was like, I want my life back. And I remember there was a change where it was like, I don't want anything to do with that life anymore.
Wow.
I want to build a new one, and I really,
How
it
did
was,
you have the energy for that? I'd just be like, I want a nap.
well, there
I
were a
sort
lot
of
of,
kidding.
I took a lot of naps.
You did. I did too. I slept like a bear for like first 2 months of all of it. It just
Well, yeah,
was,
once I could sleep again, it was
it
like, all
was
right,
amazing, wasn't it? I
I'm
know.
taking full advantage.
You literally don't think you're ever going to sleep again, right?
No,
No.
it's, yeah, you never, or at least never get like a normal night's sleep, which
Right. Yes.
yeah.
I literally
Um,
slept for 2 years on both of my recoveries.
but yeah, I mean, really for me, it was by surrounding myself with other people who believed in something bigger than I did, like opportunities bigger, not
Yeah.
even talking about the spiritual side, like just believed in like anything's possible if you just keep doing it and doing the right thing.
So how did you find these? Let's get really granular here because I think sometimes we make recovery look too easy. So someone's sitting home, they're like struggling. This is I always think about like my sickest self. And I'm like, good for you, Harry and Molly. Like, that's amazing. There's no actual way I can do that. Where would I even find these people? What if I can't go to treatment? Like, the thing I really love about, I was like trying to break down how you really did it, how your self-loathing turned to self-love, as you would say. But to me, I really think there's a line in your books, like fangirl. Um, where was it? Yeah, this line is so great. You said I was more afraid of relapse than rejection of others.
Yeah.
Like, can you like unpack that for me? Because I literally think that might be one of the great keys to what we're craving. Like, I
Yeah.
literally think that might be one of them that unlocks that box.
I'll try to unpack it and not let,
I believe in you. I believe
um,
in you.
I mean, that's what I had come to see, right? Like I had time to look at all of the nasty things I had done and where my life got me, right? So I'm now back home with this no trust. I have nothing to my name, no money. I have nothing going for me. I
Yeah, you're
failed,
back in your childhood home with no money, no friends, no nothing.
no friends. And that's such an important part because I had no friends. And I had no friends specifically that understood what I was going through. The only people that were still in my circle were family and people that kind of had to be,
Right.
you
And
know.
they were like questionable. They were like in on like a contract that they couldn't leave you.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
stuck.
They were
Um,
stuck. Okay.
but it
And
was
there's probably some people listening whose family didn't sign that contract. So they might just be like, that's really, really lucky, Harry.
I was. But for me, in terms of like it took real desperation. Like I've heard in recovery, like the gift of desperation. I
Absolutely.
was so desperate that I did not want to go back to that. I was terrified because I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I didn't want to go back there. And I think that's to just get sidetracked for 1 second. I think that's such an important part of what addiction looked like for me was the opposite of that, where it's so uncomfortable, it's so painful, but it's a discomfort and a pain that I knew. So there was a comfort in it because
Yeah.
I knew what was going to happen. And I
Devil,
knew
you
how,
know. Devil, you know. Yeah.
so the
Taking your armor off. Yeah. Taking your armor off when you're being like nursed by opiates is not a ideal path.
no, but that's,
Everything's hijacked.
yeah, but that's, I liked what you said because it's in some ways it does make it sound sort of too easy if you gloss over it. When I got out, I went to meetings by myself, and it's a very welcoming group and environment.
Nicest
But
people you'll ever meet in your life.
they
Every
are,
time I leave,
but
nicest people I ever met in my life.
but when you're new like I was and feel as uncomfortable and out of place as I did, didn't matter how welcoming they were. I was closed off to it. So I went and I stood there. I used to go and I would get there like 20 minutes early and I would just stand outside and smoke cigarettes.
Mm.
Um, and I wouldn't talk to anyone for like months.
Then what? Like,
And eventually what happened was, because it wasn't like,
but how did you not use during all of that?
because I was so afraid.
You were just freaked out.
I was so afraid of going back. And I was so desperate that I was like, I will do anything. But after going and just standing there long enough, people started to like, all right, cut it out. They recognized me, they knew my name, and they came over to me and just
Mhm.
started talking to me more than I was ready for. But it took a long time to actually find friends, to build relationships, even to where I was
Gosh,
able to call someone.
it's like what you're like. So it takes patience and it
A
takes like
lot.
willingness
And
and it takes frustration tolerance.
yeah, it,
God, we are not sales pitching right now, huh?
we're not, but the reward of
Absolutely.
is so far beyond what I thought possible
Me too.
when I was in treatment and they were trying to tell me how great recovery could be.
Yeah. I
You
was
know,
like, you're so full of it.
yeah,
And also in the beginning, when I would sit in those circles, I'd be like, you happy people need to stop because it's not happening for me. And you need to like shut the fuck up. It's annoying. You're annoying. Now I'm like so annoying. As are you,
I'm the
bright
same.
eyed and bushy tailed over there. What I think I believe in so wholeheartedly is this idea of inner wisdom, you know, the inner wisdom inside of us. And I think it whispers and then I think it screams. And I think even sometimes, we don't always have to get so quiet for it to scream. And I was reading the recovery story and I thought to myself, well, there are people, because with diet culture, it's like, sometimes people are in really bad treatment and they're in a really bad situation, right? And something inside is screaming, get out. And someone's like, no, I should stay. Maybe I can do it again if I just do it for 30 more days, or maybe I can just challenge myself to eat this. And there's this wisdom being like, stop, don't do this to yourself anymore. Get out of this cycle. But then there's this like thing in my training in dialectical behavioral therapy that's called like the addict mind, and the addict mind is like, get out of here. It's too good for you, like go back to the old way. And I feel like in your story, the kind of bravery, it's the only word I can think of. You're like, this guy's like, go call this person who's your age and make friends with him. You're like, okay. Look, I love that part of the story. It's great. You guys, he's like at TGI Fridays, like eating mozzarella sticks with these like strangers being like, what am I doing here? And then they're like your best friends now.
Yeah. And it's crazy how that little, and it felt so big at the time, but like that little bit of courage to do something a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like they were all the groomsmen in my wedding were like those same guys at that random table that I just called and met at a TGI Fridays.
There's such like a cute, I wish we had 100 hours to talk. There's such cute little side hustle love story in his book. It's great. Um, so I want to talk. So I think sometimes when we destroy our lives with addiction, we think nothing's reparable. It's a book of redemption too. How did you start to repair the relationship? So like they all love you, but they don't like you and they don't trust you. How did you repair that? I believe everything's reparable in this moment right now, not many years ago, but how did you do it?
I do too. And when I started, I don't think I did.
Oh God.
But
Right.
it started with just, it's like, all right, what can I do? Right?
Hmm.
Like, what are some really simple things that I can do? And like people taught me and sort of showed me, it was like, first and foremost, as a baseline, if I can just not get high today, that's a huge step that I can make to show people that I'm trying to do something different.
Yeah.
And then little stuff, be on time, which I wasn't today for your this
No,
podcast.
no, no. That was like a Mercury, right? That was like a Mercury retrograde. All
Uh,
good.
but things like that, like, just I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. So like the little responsibilities that I had, just try to do them well.
Isn't that crazy that the simplest things work, right? Like it's just one little kind like self-love, one little thing that is best for you adds up to more. And it's like sunshine, right? Because then your parents see that and everybody starts to see it.
And that was the only way, was those little things. Like when I was in treatment, I just remember like, what is the huge thing that I can do to just like fix it all?
Me
If
too.
I could buy that, whatever it was, I'd do it. But it
Or take a pill like
yeah,
at quick.
but it was like it was just like, no, you just have to be patient and just slowly and consistently do the right thing.
When
Oh,
did you know that you had regained their trust? Like, when did you know that you were maybe getting on some solid footing? Do you have, like, any memory?
Um, so I remember one of the things. So, I bought a house, and they had sort of helped with that. So I was like, okay, we might be on the right direction.
Right,
And
right.
then they're
They'll
like,
invest in me, right?
but then they were like, no, you can't really live there yet. So it was
Oh,
like, then I would, I would like stay there some days, and they would want me back because they didn't want me fully out. So like things started to come back slowly.
mm,
But I would say within a year and a half, sort of 2 years, it really felt like, okay, we were really making bigger strides
mhm.
um, towards it. And I would say, I thought it was really good just by writing the book, though.
Yeah,
How much closer that brought me together with my mom has been like unbelievable, which I didn't even think we needed or,
right.
we didn't need, but like that the process of kind of doing this together has been just incredibly valuable, not just for me and my mom, but my dad, my brothers, everybody as we've worked
Yeah.
on this together
Well, and it
for
sounds you have, like, an incredible relationship with your I mean, you have the intimacy that you were looking for in the opiates, right?
for sure.
I mean, that's
Better.
right. That's what we're craving, right? We're craving, like, this true intimacy and these true relationships. I remember, I forget, maybe 5 or 6 years in, it was my birthday, and my poor mother, like, bless her, she's, like, put me in psych hospitals and, like, just always worry, morning, I'm drunk phone call, trying to kill myself with the food. And I remember, like, I called her and it was my birthday, and I called her to thank her, for having me. And she said this thing. She said, "I just want to tell you, I never ever worry about you. You're not the one I worry about." And I was like, well, redemption is possible. And I read that in the book with you and your mom. Like, she like loves and respects and, looks up to you in a way. And it's like, we put down the substance and then we can have life. It's just we have to get through the muck, like the Shawshank redemption of it all. And then people don't want to do that. But look at us now.
Look at us now.
Who
But
would
that, I
have
mean,
thunk
it's
it?
those things that I think are just of all the things, gifts that we get, like something like that from your mom, to say, I don't worry about you anymore. Like those are, to me, it's been those little comments of like those little shifts
Yeah.
in somebody else's perception that have been just so valuable.
Well, you
Yeah.
know what else about that? I think that, and I actually believe this from a brain science perspective. It's like when you can get your dopamine receptors like right sized again, then an incredibly authentic, vulnerable, loving compliment from your mother is enough,
Yeah.
right? When your brain's all like fried out on sugar or bulimia or opiates, like nothing's filling that hole,
Yeah.
right? But like I can actually appreciate, and you can too. I mean, I would literally, because I want to hear everything. Like you have three. Tell us like the end. We have, tell us the end game. Tell us the end game today.
The end game.
Like, what's your life like today? What'd you
I
do?
mean, my life today is, in some ways, it feels totally normal. Other than recently, I'm like get to talk to you and be on a podcast, which is super cool, and not something I ever thought I'd do. But it's
Me
like,
neither.
yeah, like I work at a job that I love. I get to
Mhm.
help people through my work. Um, I've got a wife who's amazing
Mhm.
and was willing to see something in me beyond all of the mess that I had created. And the daughter that I talked about earlier, Aubrey, is now 9. We have the most amazing relationship. Like she is my best friend. She's um, because she's been there with me through it
Yeah.
all, through the lowest moments, and she has no idea,
Right.
like no clue. Um, then I've got a 1-year-old Sawyer who is just like a little piece of work and just super cute. We've got another kid on the way, so it's like my
Wow.
life is so full. Um, but it is just it's the simple stuff. Like I remember when I was so caught up, I would look at somebody with this like normal life and just be like, I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Um, but it's especially, I mean, for the last year we've been like locked inside, just the family with
Right.
the pandemic, but it's like, but that's enough. Like, and that's the biggest blessing of recovery for me has been just whatever I've got, and it's changed. I've been able to gain a lot of extra things and responsibilities since being in recovery. But like at most of the times throughout that process, like whatever I had in that moment was enough. And if I have that, then I'm good.
Well, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's enough.
Yeah.
It's
And
enough, and you're enough, and I'm enough. And isn't that just the most brilliant way to live? And then we can go be loving to others. If you had one thing you had to tell somebody struggling on listening to us right now, I hope you had a laugh. That's what I would say. Hope you had a laugh. What would you tell them?
well, I hope they had a laugh too. And I just would tell them, more than anything is if you're struggling, it's like even if you don't see the way out yet, like I and so many others see it and know that it's there and just
Yeah.
don't give up.
And
Like
find your people.
just
And
keep
find your people.
find your people and they will pull you out before you can, you know.
Yeah. Because you and I did not do it alone.
No.
That's what I think people really want to be convinced that they can do it alone.
Yeah. I couldn't.
Me neither. I
couldn't,
tried.
that's for
I
sure.
tried so hard.
If I,
No.
and in hindsight, even if I could do it alone, where I am today, I would never want to try that again. I would never want to have done this alone because it wouldn't mean as much.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say we're pretty good friends now, wouldn't you?
Best friends.
Besties. Should we get necklaces? The half hearts?
I think at least
Okay.
bracelets or something.
At least we'll start with bracelets. That's a good idea. See, like that's a very sober thing to say. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit. Tell us, can we like follow you on Instagram? Anything good like that?
Yeah, everything. It's my Harry Cunane. So just first and last name, Instagram, Twitter. I'm not very good at social media. My wife gives me a very hard time.
Good for you.
I need to get better.
I don't know. Careful what you wish for, but it's
Yeah.
amazing. And get his book if you want to read the story of redemption and the possibilities of healing with people that you love. It's a beautiful book and you're a beautiful man. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Harry.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay.